check out this wee wasp, a 1981 Super Carrera Targa, and I think the first yellow car to feature on the channel. Now, despite there not being much space to work here, I couldn't say no to this one, so thought I'd focus in on some of the 40-year-old exterior trim, of which this car has plenty, to see to what extent it can be restored and protected using some modern products. The ones I'd selected for the job then were Chemical Guy's Carbon Flex trim coating, which is designed to be used on rubber as well as plastic, and some Solution Finish trim restorer as a backup in case the 40-year-old trim didn't take to being coated. The old Speed Yellow Super Carrera, as I've been reliably informed it's known, was pretty unsoiled to begin with, but as with any other detail-oriented job, a wash and decontamination still had to be performed to ensure the areas I'd be working on were as clean as possible. Considering the car was almost 40 years old, the trim itself wasn't actually in bad nick. There was some superficial dirt, polish residue and a smattering of yellow overspray from previous paint jobs dotted here and there, but nothing too untoward, so I was hoping a decent clean and light bit of restoration would hopefully bring it all back up to scratch. As you can probably guess then, the first thing I did was give the car a quick bath, which included a pre-soak with some gentle snow foam, which after being left to soak into the trim and surrounding paintwork was rinsed off with the washer at a slightly reduced pressure to prevent any bits of 40-year-old trim flying off before I had the chance to treat it. It was then of course given a quick contact wash from top to bottom with a soft mitt to remove any of the remaining dirt from the panels that the pre-clean hadn't. Following that, all of the trim itself was independently tended to with a super soft brush and some all-purpose cleaner to further deep clean and degrease it, which is important to do when wanting to properly treat trim. And while there wasn't a huge amount of dirt pulled out here, I did notice the odd bit of grime, so it was definitely worth doing in addition to the wash. The wee wasp was then rinsed off with the pressure washer one last time to remove all of the various residues and freshly released dirt. Prior to being dried off with a plush microfibre towel before the sun had a chance to spot the finishes. Yes, viewers, I was working in the sun again because, well, it was sunny. Now, if it wasn't a warm day, I would have cracked the blower out here to force any trapped water out from the 40-year-old cracks and crevices, but a simple towel dry thankfully sufficed. Once that was done, I used some Menzerna control cleaner, which is basically just an isopropyl alcohol mix, to give the freshly cleaned trim a final spritz and wipe down to strip away any remaining residue from the surface and leave it completely naked and ready for its new clobber, which in this case will be the coating or restorative dye. You can still coat or restore trim without doing this, but it just helps ensure your product bonds, cures or soaks in properly and therefore provides the best durability possible. Unlike a dressing or even the solution finish, if a trim coating gets on the paintwork, it isn't just wiping off, so you should mask up the surrounding areas of any trim you intend to coat. Now, you'll have to forgive my crude masking here. I did spend a good half an hour or so on a few select parts, but any longer trying to make it look pretty for the sake of the video, and I wouldn't have had that time to get everything done. Unfortunately, the dropper of the coating bottle that allows you to dispense it in a controlled manner had it from the get-go, which meant that I had to apply it onto the suede wrapped pad with an open top, which wasn't an ideal start, but there you go. If I was simply just dressing the trim, it would have all gone swimmingly, no doubt. Despite that initial hiccup, I wanted to at least give the coating a go, so applied it as best I could in the sun, which of course you shouldn't really be doing either, before leaving it for 15 minutes or so to cure, then wiping over with a towel, which isn't as critical as with a paintwork coating but still generally makes sense. Now, you could definitely see the difference the coating made, and it was certainly better than the unfinished 40-year-old trim, but arguably still a bit too show shine for a classic old car like this. Still, I plodded on with the undispensable coating, applying it as best I could to a few other areas of the Targa's tired trim. Now, while coatings can be finicky in terms of their application, trim coatings are far more forgiving than their paintwork counterparts, so you can afford a little less finesse and even get away with applying them outdoors as I was here, although an enclosed, controlled environment is always preferable. Now, unfortunately, aside from a couple of vinyl and plastic bits, it soon became apparent that the rubber parts, which made up the vast majority of the car's exterior trim, just weren't going to take to the coating. Perhaps because of the sun, perhaps because of their age, or perhaps because of my somewhat rushed application. But to be honest, even if the coating had played nicely, I still think the finish it left was a bit too much for this car, so step up the solution finish instead, which could hopefully give the rubber a more natural but still long-lasting finish. This slightly more versatile product can be applied with either a microfibre or sponge applicator pad, or even just a towel wrapped finger, but whichever you go with, just make sure you wear gloves as it can get messy, especially if you plan to apply liberally as I did. Starting with the whale tail on the back, which I knew being porous would absorb a lot of the black stuff, I applied and rubbed in a healthy amount of solution finish to hopefully breathe some life back into its blubber. You can apply it as lightly or as heavily as you like on a material like this, and it doesn't really matter if it's worked in a linear or circular motion, so long as you wipe it over with a dry microfiber towel afterwards to even it out and remove any excess. The vents and details on top of the Targa's tea tray were tended to with a brush which was carefully dipped into the small sample pot before being worked in to ensure all the neglected nooks and crannies saw a generous helping of it. Following application, there's no real need to let this product sit or cure like a dedicated coating, so depending on how you've applied it, you can either buff off with a microfiber towel to remove any excess, or even just leave it at that if a light application achieves the desired result. It is important to quickly remove it from surrounding paintwork though, as although any dried on excess can be eliminated with some all-purpose cleaner or isopropyl alcohol, it's much easier to just get it when it's wet. You can mask off if you want to avoid this, but I prefer to be a bit messy during application and just ensure I mop up any overspill afterwards, much like when using dressings. Plus, I'd already spent a good half hour masking up earlier and didn't fancy doing the same again for a product that can essentially be removed. The concertinaed bumper corners were also given the brush treatment, which despite being messy seemed to work well and leave a nice finish, especially after being given a good wipe with a towel, and it even managed to draw one of the local curtain twitches out for further investigation. Last to see some of the solution finish was the weathered old Targa hoop, as it's one of, if not the main features of the car and so couldn't be skipped, and while it really needed properly repainting, still looked a whole lot better for an application and buff over. It was then simply a case of catching up with everything off camera to make sure it was all finished to an acceptable standard before wiping around all the edges with a control cleaner primed towel to ensure any remaining black residue was properly removed from the yellow paintwork before I picked the camera up to show you the sunny fruits of my labour. So, as I've already said then, although the chemical guise coating can technically be used on rubber, it didn't work particularly well here, which wasn't necessarily anything to do with the product itself, but rather the conditions, material and manner in which it was applied. The solution finish trim restorer, on the other hand, as I suspected it would, suited this old Porker's rubber bits a bit better, and probably would have been the best bet from the start. It was a bit weird tending to trim like this when the surrounding paintwork hadn't been properly sorted first, but there's only so much I can do during a single shoot, so the trim was to be the subject of the video, regardless of the condition of the paintwork on arrival, but still, I think it looked good enough from most angles to justify the treatment. And that was that really, as there's only so much you can say about rubbing stuff into a car's exterior trim. I think for the most part I'll be sticking with my dressings as they suit the work I do better. However, I'd be willing to switch to some solution finish for areas that demanded better durability or that needed some colour breathing back into them. But I'll continue to leave the coatings to the unit-based guides, as trying to make them work outside of a controlled environment is just asking for trouble. So, cheers for tuning in, despite the hiccups. Hopefully you enjoyed the vid as much as I enjoyed fettling the little Super Carrera in the sun, as it was as much about getting this cool car on camera as it was actually performing some detailing duties on it. Either way though, thanks for your time.